I want to say that my position is pro-happy. I want to be clear about that. And my organization, Engaged Jewish Service Corps, was begun because it recognized that baby boomers often feel a lot of what was shown in the movie, disconnected, isolated. So it was for the baby boomers themselves to come to an organization, be matched up with opportunities to volunteer in areas of interest, but also to connect with others. We give a lot of socializing opportunities, and some of the volunteering that we do is around common interests. So, for example, we have Engage in Song, where people that like to sing get together, and we go to nursing homes, and we go to My Second Home, where we sing with Alzheimer daycare patients, people that just come for the day, and all different. We sing with children, and it's uplifting on both ends. It's uplifting for the people that we sing with, and it's not performance, it's more sing-along, because just the singing in itself, if anyone who does sing, even in the shower, you know, it's very uplifting. So it helps everyone, and it's just a one, and that's just one. There's Engage in Knitting, and then there's the volunteer opportunities that I'm sure that you do as well. Do you want to talk about this? Keep going, yeah.
You know, I mean, all the volunteer experiences that you do, whether it be on an organized or whether it be on a day-to-day basis, I think make that idea that the movie talked about so nicely, that you matter, right? That there's a bigger picture in the world. And so I'm born and raised in Westchester, and we are in this amazingly affluent county. And so it always does strike me when I do things like my company recently did birthday boxes for children that have no families. And so you create this box, and you do a card, and you put a cake in it, and you address it to a child in Westchester that has no mom or dad to celebrate a birthday. So it can be very powerful to sort of recognize that idea of how grateful we are.
I'll just add one little thing, which is, and it was said in the movie about acknowledging that you do have a lot when you actually help someone who doesn't. And I think that Westchester, as affluent as it is also very, they're very disparate income levels and living situations. So you don't have to go to India to a home where people are dying to find a place where the need is great. You can do it very locally, and it has probably the same impact, right? So that, giving, even when you don't have that much, right? And volunteerism is a really simple way to do that. It doesn't cost in, monetary terms, and it makes you realize all that you do have.
Thank you. So who wants to be our first contributor with a question? Nobody wants to be first, everybody wants to be last. So don't wait, here we go.
The question I have is, one of the first statistics that they were talking about, the composition of what makes people happy, interestingly, aside obviously 50% with genetics, but 40% seem to be intent, purpose, which means that they come from outside, they can be influenced. What do we teach educators, or how important is that in the process of education for children, and how important has it been as advocates for our children? My son already is in college, so we're talking, even seeing him grow in making our gross national happiness part of our curriculum for children, so they grow up to be adults that also pursue it and can emulate it.
We do have an educator with us, Linda.
Yeah, I have thoughts about, no,
Wendy, go ahead.
I have so many thoughts about that. What do we do and what don't we do? Unfortunately, I think, and you see it in the movie, there's so much play and dancing and singing. Do you ever know, you see the parts where people are happy, and there's a lot of movement and some singing and chanting even. And in early childhood, we see so much of that, right? That the joy of movement, the joy of chanting together, uniformity, singing together, and the voices, either good or bad, being wonderful. And I teach college, and we don't do so much of that. And I think quickly children, as they go through schooling, the things that were at one time play are even turned into work, or vice versa. So, you can get kids to put the garbage away by singing and, let's put the toys away, whatever, right? But then that quickly becomes work, and it's no longer enjoyable, and I think we do a lot, unfortunately, to squelch the joy in classrooms, and I'm guilty myself of doing that, right? We have a setup like this, and everybody sits passively as they're expected to. You don't get up in the middle and dance. If you do, there's something wrong with that. So I think your point is a really good one. We should strive. And at college level, we're certainly seeing that. We strive to bring more of that joy into the learning process. But I would say, preschool, kindergarten, it's there, inherently, and then quickly, the focus is homework all of a sudden, and getting stuff done as opposed to the process.
I think I have a little bit of a different spin though. So I recognize the question was about education, but I would probably want to spin it and talk a little bit about the family. The questions that you ask the kids when they come home, or how you say, oh, I have to go to work today. I mean, anyone ever done that? Can't wait till Friday. Anyone ever said that? Can't wait to vacation. Can't wait till the holidays. Does these sound vaguely familiar? So the message really we're giving is, we just missed life. And there's a quick Daniel Gilbert, and I put a plug in for probably the really first book that started this whole movement, was Stumbling on Happiness. And that's why you didn't see a lot about the American culture. We are future focused, and we've done that. So we want the teachers to teach for a test. We have this idea that these are milestones of successes, that when that happens. So I think as parents, you can really stop and say, it's great if you can do singing, but I don't think you have to do that. I mean, I think it's just simply enjoying being together. Simply enjoying an experience, and that would really include failure. There's just so much to learn from falling down and getting back up that makes it really very, actually fun, which is a bizarre sort of way to look at it.
And I don't work with children, but I think, remembering back, I don't think that we encourage children or adults to be very unique. I think a lot of the reinforcement comes from fitting in and becoming part of that conformity. And I think if we celebrated differences more, then people would feel happier with themselves, instead of always feeling that you have to live up to someone else's expectations, whether it's a parent or a teacher.
As I'm waiting for the next person to raise their hand, if you've been to more than 2 other screenings, raise your hand. If this is at least your 3rd screening. Okay, so about half the room. I'm just wondering, because this is a particularly good turnout for a film that doesn't have an obvious interest group other than people who like to be happy. Usually when we get this much of a turnout, there's been a lot of promotion from particular organizations that are represented in the film or on the panel. So I was really quite surprised to see this many people who want to come and see a film about an emotion. So I'm not sure exactly what that says about us. I suppose something, hopefully something good. So who has another question or observation? Yes.
Can we pass the microphone? Deborah, did you want to comment on my observation about people showing up?
I did, because what struck me, I did watch this once before, but what struck me the first time and again this time is that we actually have 40% of intentional activity that we can do to make ourselves happy. So I think, if you came to this and you're in this room, then no matter, you could be happy, but maybe you could see being happier. And I think that you know, that is an amazing gift to even recognize. So that's what I worked on. I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said a life of pursuing happiness, because sometimes you're just not happy with that set point that you got from parents and however you were brought up. So, I mean, I think that's really the gift of the movie, and it may mean that you have to give up things like complaining. It's not that easy. It really isn't. There's a whole movement, complaintfreeworld.org, where community practice, because it's really shifting your focus so that when things happen, instead of just, you know, reacting, you can choose your reaction and choose what you do with it. So, and complaining is just reinforcing negative. So it's sort of, you know, you get what you look at, kind of. And I think that could be taught in school, perhaps.
So, someone has the mic here.
Wendy, your comment about, you know, the comments that all of us have made about work really resonated with me, and I guess as a person who has people who work for me, any thoughts about how we bring more joy to the workplace?
You know, it's not funny that I say this, right? But Victoria's comment is, so I work more in the corporate arena, and it's not uncommon. I was just doing some numbers, fun facts. So my company did 4,000 happiness seminars this year, talking to about 700,000 people. So we are definitely in an amazing world where you see these statistics, and I'll tell you that 40%, I know the Journal of the American Medical Association is actually going to say it's higher. It's the first time that we're seeing the medical community really saying lifestyle choices changes everything. So, you know, I can tell you, you know, I have a stressful life. Everyone in this room has a stressful life. But I do my due diligence to bring my A game on. So this is, you can ask my mom who's in the front, this is getting pretty close to my bedtime. I have a mentor who's amazing, Loretta LaRoche. She has a saying that says, did everything, died anyway. So I go to bed. It's single mom, you guys know I'm raising my 3 kids here, and I go to bed. So I wake up, I'm in a really good mood. So when I walk in, I feel my company, they need me to bring my A game on. They need me to be a happy boss. Not some of the time, all of the time. That's the standard that we're looking for. Getting there is part of the process. So, you know, there are particular times when my kids were very little, I would take bubble baths. And if they talked, guess what would happen to that bubble bath? You just got a little longer. So that when you get out, you're ready to be the best mom you can be. So, you know, my office is down in Ossining near the Riverkeeper, and I'll go for a walk if my buttons get pushed. So there are these tools that they sort of alluded to in the movie that I do take very seriously. And the biggest one is really exercise. So people are always very surprised that I'll be selfish, and that comes next to sleep. Sleep and exercise, I mean, how many of you do it regularly? I'd love to see quick hand. Hour, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, what are we doing?
Exercising?
I mean, how many of you sleep 8 hours a night? 8. The number after 7. So these are really very clear scientific facts that affect your happiness factor.
Do you work for Eileen Fisher?
Yeah, it's funny. The comment was about Eileen Fisher. You know, there's just so much. Sorry.
There's so many of the leaders of these amazing people that have done well that buy into that philosophy because the research science is so strong. And just to tell you, in corporate America, we expect in the next 10 years sleep to be a mandated criteria for employees. And for the cynics in the room, I started 27 years ago, and I was at a speech where somebody sat in front and said, someday you're not going to be able to smoke in the office. And we were like, that's ridiculous. Can you ever imagine the government telling us we can't smoke in the office? I mean, that just seemed absurd. So for the cynics who don't think that sleep is going to be mandated in your performance review, you're wrong. There's too much evidence about how it affects your mood and your productivity. And the next one that you want to talk about is mindfulness. You know, my youngest son says it best. I know when you hug me right, and I know when you don't. Right?
I watched.
Is there such a thing as being too happy or too happy all the time? You know, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. My father was a very cheerful man, and if somebody would say to him, "Hey, Bert, how are you?" He'd say, "If I was any happier, they'd have to give me pills."
I'll take that a little bit. I think people mean different things when they say that person's too happy, and one of the downsides, at least assumptions about it, and there's a little evidence that you're less productive if you're, sort of not attending to the nitty-gritty work, and, happy things may take you away from necessary things. I think that's sort of not the case, right? But people get overly happy. People sometimes get a bad rep at work, for example, right? People, how do you make the workplace happy? I love my job. I love my office. My employees like coming to work. And they don't just say it, they really do. We like being there. One of them had to leave today. Her son was sick, and she was so upset that she had to leave work, and upset that her son was sick. But, she can get joy from her work, and I think there are ways to take the serious efforts that we have to complete and make them joyful. People talk about mania, or, someone who's overly happy, they might call that, but I don't think there's evidence that you can be too happy or too happy too much of the time. I don't think the data are there, but I'm not sure about the situation with your dad. But I think other than some abnormal condition, I think the happier the better.
So it's always good to have a panel, right, to get a range of, I think, experiences. I went to Penn, so Penn is really the birthplace of positive psychology, Harvard, happiness. Little rivalry between the two schools. So one of the things that we've talked about being a positive psychologist is the idea that you get to experience sadness. And so for me, the answer would be a little different. It's important, the most devastating thing that happened in my life is my dad dying. And as someone who is really very committed to being positive, it means I experience sadness. I experience despondency. I know it's going to get better, but it never goes away. And so the range of emotions is something that we're looking for. Doesn't mean you walk around happy all the time. It's the biggest misconception about positive psychology. It means tell me my problems, tell me where I'm going to be sad and angry, and then how it's going to get better. And I do have to plug for children. They are allowed to be angry, and they're allowed to be sad. So the idea that they would be too happy all the time, I might have a different response and say, I've had a client scream and yell at me. I get to experience anger. And then I get to experience how I'm going to handle that.
I do agree. I do agree. I think the too happy thing, I don't think anybody's happy all the time. I think some people just don't share their sadness or their upset outwardly. So I think that it may be more of a facade than someone's not experiencing sadness. I don't think that is too common, that people don't have the sadness. I think people don't show it. And there are detriments to that. I think I would agree. We used to call them repressors, people who don't show their unhappiness, and there are some health consequences to that. But I don't think your dad was probably not experiencing happiness. I bet it was just not shared with the family in a sense. I think we hide our emotions, and I would agree. I think we're allowed, and we should allow other people to be unhappy, right? We shouldn't expect them to always be happy.
Questions? If you don't ask a question, I'm just going to start telling you about my way.
Actually, I have a comment about, thank you. I wanted to comment a little bit about the film itself, that I noticed the women who were in the Japanese group singing for the loss of their obvious spouses or husbands or sons, all women singing. And that was from the pressures that the husbands or the men had, that there were no men there So it was a Kuroshi or whatever, the group that passed away and died from the stress. Also, the elderly women in the group nursing home were all women also. And the youth, the American youth, were the ones who were talked about bullying and talked about ridicule. And we did not see that in the Indian culture. We did not see that in Denmark. We did not see that in Japan. So I long ago worked in daycare. There is such a thing as a competition always for children to be better than someone else and not have the compassion. And it's more of a comment because it concerns me about technology, with kids looking at their phones all day, isolating one another and competing all the time. There is very little, it's a lack of tolerance for grief or lack of tolerance for pain or suffering. So it's something to consider with our kids, especially when they're young, to be able to have more compassion. I would be curious to see what other cultures allow in their schools, allow that kind of, when teachers or administrators don't pay attention to the bullying. It's a concern.
I mean, the movie touched on so much. I'm not sure we can go through everything, but I'm going to go back to the gender issue for a second because it's super interesting to me as a woman business. And unfortunately, you should know we haven't moved the needle on this issue for women in about 100 years. So the studies are pretty clear that the women's stress level is still way higher than men. Women are still doing what they call second shifts. So they're still doing basically all the responsibilities in the home and then at work. So you can imagine how that affects the happiness factor. And so it has a trickle-down effect to their children. In terms of compassion, though, I have to be very clear. I mean, where do children learn that? Absolutely. So, while I'm not in any way promoting the use of video games, I do want to say that parents are spending a lot of time and energy on Grand Theft Auto, and the studies have not come out to support that there's any harm in it. Doesn't mean I like it, but it's like you pick your battle as a parent, and that's probably not the best battle to pick. So there's an amazing book, and I use it all the way up until older than I am. I mean, I've used it, it's called Hey Little Ant. And it's a very quick way to do a compassion test. It is a story about an ant, and I'm gonna not tell you more because I'm gonna entice you to look at it. It's a beautiful book. And it's a very good way to see how you're doing. Do a check-in on how you feel about the ant. So I would spend time looking in my own world to see, how someone is treating animals, how they're treating neighbors, how they're treating people on a train. That's a good way to see how you're doing, more than the culture issue, on a global, sort of take care of the family first. Yeah.
I have one little point here. It's so interesting the way the women are portrayed, and if you think about it, the happy men, think about the happy men that were in the movie. Where were they and who were they?
Hunters and gatherers.
They were alone, right? They were alone, out with nature or something like that, right? Doing their thing, right? In one case, in a sort of stereotyped masculine way. And so the movie is taking liberties, perhaps, in the ways the men and the women are shown, but it might reflect something like a reality or an expectation about how men and women are supposed to experience their happiness. But the other thing I would say is the lack of American culture there, the sort of individualistic way Americans sort of think about the self is contrasted with this more collectivist orientation in many other cultures. But in the US, certainly we have pockets where there's more collectivist orientation. So thinking about the group as opposed to the individual, and women show more collectivist tendencies than men and certain ethnic groups as well. So I think that's really interesting. I love that you pointed it out, both this gendered thing as well as this individualistic collectivist portrayal. And I just remind us that the truth may not be in the film in a sense. It is the view of the director to some great extent, if you listen to him talking about it, but other things as well.
I don't remember where the mention was that it's harmful to complain. But, and I imagine if you do it all the time, it could be a real drag. But doesn't it feel good, make people happy to complain and fetch and, you know, get it off their chest?
So you know there's a study on that, right? I mean, there's a study on everything. So venting is really important, but there's a scientific study that says no more than 7 minutes.
The wire therapy session's 45.
You know, I say this sort of with I mean, I went to school partly to be trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? The idea of moving your behavior, your thought to your behaviors. And therapy is an amazing experience to have. But I will tell you this, that New York Times and a bunch of other research scientists came out with a journal that showed that actually coaching is more effective than therapy. So she'll give you your card afterwards. So the idea is to move forward. It's a luxury to look back, and I'm not in any way discouraging people to have that experience. It's interesting, it's incredibly sort of aha, but it really is so empowering to know. How long does it take to rewire the human brain? No. A nanosecond. It is a split second when you said, I'm doing it. So probably our best example is that is a 4-minute mile. Anybody a runner in the room? So you know they said the 4-minute mile was unbreakable. Every doctor, every athlete, right? And what happened? Someone broke it. And it was just like, no! It's just the power of the brain. It's just unbelievable. We've just our own limits. And so venting can be very dangerous because once you're in the quicksand and you're done, it's difficult to get out.
And if it really makes you feel good, I wouldn't argue with it, but I wonder how the reaction of the people that you're complaining to, if it's wonderful for them. That's just one thought that I have.
Yeah, I would agree that one thing to do with some of that complaining is to journal. There's evidence that writing about your problems or even trauma, serious trauma, can be very therapeutic and helpful and may cost less than a therapist or coach. And doing that and doing it is not, the reasons aren't just magic. Part of the reason is that through that process, you think, putting the ideas into words helps you think through to a solution potentially. So maybe if the people around you are playing that role, right? So when you complain, someone offers an option and then you think, no, that's not gonna work, and someone else offers you another option, maybe they are serving a purpose. But I would agree that some of that complaining is in session often. People do it together and it is kind of joyous.
I have a question for Deborah. I talked about something about laughter. What is that? What's this laughter business?
I'm a certified laughter leader, and that, you know, I try lots of different things, and that was one of them. You can find it on World Laughter Tour. I think it's .org, but it could be .com. Steve Wilson is the person. And it actually began in India. They were doing laughter workshops with employees before work to change the energy.
It's like laughter yoga?
It is like laughter yoga, yes, very much. So it's sort of fake it till you feel it kind of thing. So there are laughter exercises. Then there's just a basic sort of ho, ho, ha, 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 ho, ho, ha, 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 ho, ho, ha, 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 yay! And even the yays is in that embracing energy and embracing life. So it's positions of your body, and it is exercise too. It could be done seating. I did, when I was actually doing a lot of workshops, I was working at Sarah Newman with people that were recovering. They were in a recovery state from surgery, and it's proven to help healing. So it's any kind of laughter. Norman Cousins is one of the people who healed himself with laughter. He said, don't come, when he was, I think he had cancer, and he said, don't come and see me unless you can tell me a joke or something that will uplift me. And I think he then got all kinds of movies, all humor movies, and helped himself. And it does change your mood, but it also changes your chemistry. So,
You remember the movie Patch Adams?
yeah.
I was surprised that the movie didn't put very much of any emphasis on the creative arts as a way of both bringing happiness and being in the flow.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm not sure why at all, but I think the mention of flow is important. One of the books on the little handout you got is one of the books on flow, and I think just the concept, they said it very briefly, but you can find it in almost anything, and it's going to be very individualized, and certainly many people's reports are that they experience that sort of loss of a sense of self and immersion in an activity. They often refer to artistic enterprises, but they didn't make much of it. But I do agree there's lots of reasons to think about engagement in those kinds of activities as important to one's happiness.
Which is also interesting in terms of so many of the arts programs being dropped in schools.
And I think that anything that takes you out of the part of your mind that's always talking to you, I would do more of that personally. So it's anything that really takes you away, where all of a sudden an hour went by, and it could be at work. I mean, oftentimes it is at work. You're on a project, you're very focused. That can be great satisfaction, and the arts, and I agree with you, it's a great loss if that happens. If we focused on gross national happiness, that would certainly take a higher priority than other things.
The comment is that, as if to reinforce your observation about the 4-minute mile, the record was broken 25 days later. So the second person was able to circumvent it. The question is whether it's plausible to think that some people are simply born happy, whether through inheritance or for whatever other reason, and basically are able to be happy no matter what the circumstances are.
They've done, there's a gentleman, Martin Seligman, who's done a lot of work on that. And so his life work says that Americans, we only have about 1%.
The library will be closing in a half hour. Please note the computers will be shutting down in about 15
lovely
minutes.
voice.
Please save all your work.
Very soothing. So the studies are in that, in the American culture, his belief is that 1% are born optimistic. His work has learned optimism. But I think one of the things that's important about the movie, and I feel like it came across, but I'd love to throw it back, is part of happiness is tied into how difficult you make your life. That's what the flow means. So it's about how challenging you make your life. So with creative arts, or however you fill in the bucket, it's how many times have you done something that you actually couldn't believe you've done. And so I think that you can't be born with that. You have to try that.
So,
Oh yeah, Victoria, you gotta have the mic. I mean, we gotta have the mic.
no, I just didn't understand that. So if I make my life complicated, which
Oh, I didn't say complicated. I said hard. There's a big difference between complicated and hard and challenging. So the really hard questions are, when is the last time you failed?
Yesterday. No, this morning.
Well, you're an official. I mean, you've chosen, and that's an exact fear that we have, that people don't want to be elected officials, because it's really hard. You have to run, there's a risk of losing. There's a risk of putting yourself out there. Do you know more people canceled Thanksgiving in America because of the election than ever before in history? They were afraid to have a hard conversation with their own family.
I have a question. I have a question over here.
Oh, no.
So there was this thing called an election this past year, and I think in each of your capacities, have any of you been approached by people feeling melancholy about it? And if so, what has your advice been?
So I wouldn't choose to use the word melancholy, I would choose a much stronger word. It's the most divided we've ever seen. I mean, I have a corporate American lens, so I can't name some of the clients, but we've had sessions that normally get 50 and 60 people that have 500 and 600 people in them. We did more sessions on how to talk to your children about the election. What does the word respect mean? I'm a respectful workplace, a certified respectful workplace educator, and I thought that was ridiculous. Should we need a class on how to treat each other nicely? And guess what I learned? Really do, like so badly. So, we are in a situation where it's complicated times, and we have to just understand that it's harder now. And that's okay, but we have to have more discussions. We have to be able to learn how to talk to one another, and we have to be able to share our feelings to get that happiness state. So my 20 years of experience would tell you, you're not born that way, you train it every day, and the studies are pretty clear. It's from age 5 to 90 are the most operable. So we got a long span there to work on.
Well, I'll go back and forth about this. Are you born happy? If 50% of the variability in happiness is genetic, that suggests that there's a genetic component to happiness. So some people do have a higher set point, if you will, or however you want to call it. And Davidson's work does show that at rest, that left frontal lobe looks different in some people. So, when you're experiencing happiness, you see those pretty pictures and the lights going, but some people have more chronic activity in some areas than others. So there are data to suggest that there are individual differences, right, to start. But the point again is that doesn't doom you, just like lots of things, right? It doesn't doom you, but it may take a little longer to recover from the car accident scene, right? They say, well, the happy people, forget it quickly. And if you're one of those people who's had a car accident or something and you ruminate about it and you think about it for a long time, it may be a little bit harder for you to recover. And sort of back to this, I've had tons of experiences since Election Day with students, faculty, colleagues trying to deal with this. The day after Election Day, I took a group of students to a conference in Tampa. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, we got in a van to head to the annual Biomedical Research Conference for Menard.